Transfer 51% of your company to Ethan. My future mother-in-law smiled as she said it. If you don't, this wedding ends here. The champagne glasses had barely stopped clinking. The band was still playing the last note of our entrance song. 200 guests watched us beneath warm string lights and white roses. No one laughed. No one moved. My fiancé, the man who had promised to spend the rest of his life protecting me, stood beside me with his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't say no. He didn't tell his mother to stop. He didn't even look at me. That silence told me everything. 3 years earlier, I thought I was marrying a good man. 3 seconds after his mother spoke, I realized I had almost signed away far more than a marriage. I had almost handed strangers the company I'd spent 10 years building. Marlene stepped closer. To everyone else, it looked affectionate. She brushed a tiny piece of lace near my shoulder and smiled like a woman welcoming a daughter into the family. Only I could hear the steel beneath her voice. Don't look frightened, Claire. This is just family business. I kept smiling for the guests. What kind of family business? The kind that should never require lawyers. She glanced toward Ethan. He still hadn't looked up. Then she lowered her voice another notch. You built Bennett Supply Group before you met my son. After today, you're his wife. Why should a husband have no control over what belongs to his family? Control. Not partnership. Not trust. Control. One word. One crack. Everything suddenly made sense. Before I could answer, Marlene turned toward the room. Her smile grew warmer. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should recognize Claire. People applauded politely. She waited. Perfect timing. Perfect control. No one can deny. This remarkable young woman built Bennett Supply Group from nothing. More applause. She nodded proudly toward me. Then, without changing her expression, she slid the knife in. And because she's joining our family today, we've asked her to transfer 51% of the company shares to Ethan. The applause died instantly. A fork hit the floor somewhere behind table 6. Someone whispered, "What?" Marlene continued speaking before anyone could process it. It's not about money. It's about trust. A marriage shouldn't have walls. If Claire truly believes in this marriage, she'll have no reason to hesitate. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every sentence was carefully built to make only one person look unreasonable. Me. I looked at Ethan. Still nothing. Not even one step toward me. His fingers were locked together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He knew. Not suspected, knew. This hadn't been an impulsive speech. They had planned it. Maybe not every word, but enough. Enough that the man I loved had arrived at our wedding knowing his mother intended to ask for my company. And he'd chosen silence. For one dangerous second, I almost gave in. Not because I wanted to, because 200 people were watching. Because I'd spent months planning this day. Because I'd already imagined our honeymoon, our first house, our children. Amazing how quickly the human heart starts negotiating with itself. Maybe she's just emotional. Maybe Ethan will stop her. Maybe this doesn't have to end. Then another voice answered inside my head. If this conversation is happening before the marriage, what happens after the papers are signed? I built Bennett Supply Group long before Ethan entered my life. It began inside a rented warehouse outside Newark. One leaking roof, one used delivery van, one folding desk. There were weeks when I signed payroll before paying myself, winters when I slept on an office couch because snowstorms had trapped half my drivers. Suppliers laughed when a 26-year-old woman tried negotiating freight contracts. I negotiated anyway. Clients hung up on me. I called back. Every warehouse, every account, every contract, every employee, every dollar of value inside that company had been earned the hard way. No Carter had been there. Not one. When Ethan and I met, that was what attracted me to him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't arrogant. He'd wait in my office lobby while I finished late calls with regional buyers. He'd bring dinner when he knew I'd forgotten to eat. One night, after I'd spent 18 straight hours dealing with a warehouse fire, he wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and quietly said, "You don't have to be strong every minute." No one had ever said that to me before. I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him. His family welcomed me just as warmly. Mylene called me daughter before there was even a proposal. Howard always insisted I sit beside him during Sunday dinners. Brittany joked that I was the only woman she knew who could negotiate shipping rates and still remember everyone's birthday. Looking back, none of them asked for anything at first. That's what made them dangerous. Trust isn't usually stolen. It's borrowed. One small favor at a time. "Ethan," I spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "Did you know?" His jaw tightened. He swallowed once, then finally looked at me. Only for a second. "Claire." "Please." Not an answer, a request. "Let's not do this here." My heart sank, because innocent people answer questions. Guilty people ask for better timing. Marlene heard him. She smiled, confident now. He understands. You should too. We're only asking for what every real family shares. I looked at her, then at Ethan, then at the wedding ring waiting inside its velvet box. For the first time that day, it didn't look like a promise. It looked like collateral. I slowly loosened my grip on the bouquet, lifted my eyes toward the stage, and noticed something I'd ignored all afternoon. The wireless microphone for the parent speeches was still sitting on its stand, waiting, unmuted. The microphone waited exactly where the master of ceremonies had left it. Black, wireless, still live. Marlene noticed me looking at it. She smiled. She thought I'd finally understood. Good. I knew you'd make the right decision. I almost laughed. She genuinely believed fear looked like surrender. Before I moved, Ethan caught my wrist. His grip wasn't hard, just desperate. "Claire," his voice barely carried beyond us. "Can we please talk somewhere private?" I looked at his hand around my wrist, then back into his eyes. "Private?" He nodded quickly. "This isn't how families solve problems." "No?" I asked quietly. "Then why did your mother wait until there were 200 witnesses?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because he knew the answer. A demand made in public was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to trap. Marlene stepped between us before Ethan could speak again. She rested one hand lightly on my forearm. "If you walk to that microphone, people will think you're overreacting." Her tone was gentle, almost maternal. "Don't let one misunderstanding ruin a beautiful day." I looked at her. "You called it a misunderstanding." "I did. So if I say no, the wedding still happens?" For the first time, her smile hesitated. Only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. "I didn't say that." "No," I replied. "You didn't. You said the wedding ends." There it was, her own trap, spoken back to her. The room had grown unnaturally quiet. Guests weren't eating anymore. They weren't dancing. They were pretending not to listen, which meant every one of them was listening. Howard finally approached, wine glass still in his hand. Calm, measured. The kind of man who preferred someone else to start the fire. Claire, he smiled politely. Don't misunderstand, Marlene. This isn't greed. It's protection. Protection from what? He spread his hands. Life changes after marriage. Businesses fail. Children come. Health changes. Ethan should have the legal authority to protect the company if something happens. Reasonable. Logical. Almost convincing. If he'd started there months ago, maybe I'd have listened. But he hadn't. He'd waited until I was standing in a wedding dress. So, I asked, if that's true, why 51%? Howard blinked. What? Why not a medical power of attorney? Why not a succession agreement? Why not a voting trust? Silence. I took one small step closer. Because none of those give you control. 51% does. The color drained from his face. Before Howard could answer, Brittany stood from her table. She raised her champagne glass. I honestly don't see the problem. Several Carter relatives nodded immediately. Brittany looked around the room as if speaking common sense. When two people get married, everything becomes ours. She smiled at me. So why are you acting like he's stealing from you? A few guests shifted awkwardly. Others looked thoughtful. That was the dangerous part. Simple lies always sound reasonable. I turned toward Brittany. You work for me. She laughed. I do. How long? Almost 3 years. And during those 3 years, how many shares of Bennett Supply Group have you earned? Her smile faded. What does that have to do with anything? Answer. She folded her arms. None. I nodded once. So employment doesn't automatically create ownership. She looked toward Marlene, searching for help. I continued before anyone could interrupt. Marriage doesn't either. A murmur spread across the ballroom. This time, not everyone was whispering against me. Ethan finally stepped in. He moved between us. Not to defend me, to stop the conversation. Enough. His voice was calm. We're all emotional. He turned to me. I know this looks bad. Looks? It is bad. He closed his eyes briefly. Claire, my mother chose the wrong time. There should have been another conversation. My heartbeat slowed. There it was. The confession, hidden inside the excuse. Another conversation. There was never supposed to be a conversation. Another. Meaning, this had always been coming. Just not today. I stared at him. How long have you known? He didn't answer. Ethan. How long? His shoulders sagged. A few weeks. The words hit harder than Marlene's demand. A few weeks? I thought I could talk her out of it. You didn't. I tried. You didn't tell me. I didn't want to ruin the engagement. No, I whispered. You wanted to make sure I still walked down the aisle. He reached for both of my hands. Please listen. I love you. I know what this looks like. We'll sign a prenup. We'll hire lawyers. We'll fix every legal issue after the honeymoon. I searched his face. He still didn't understand. He thought this was about paperwork. It wasn't. It was about the fact that he'd watched a trap being built around me and decided it would be easier if I didn't know it existed. A memory flashed through my mind. 6 months earlier, Paula, my operations director, had walked into my office carrying a thick blue folder. She closed the door, then quietly asked, Claire, are you sure you want family working here? Inside the folder were attendance reports, expense claims, vendor complaints, mileage records, purchase orders, page after page, documenting things I'd been too busy or too trusting to see. Brittany charging personal lunches to client accounts. Peter approving invoices for work that never happened. Dana claiming overtime while vacation photos appeared online. Even Ethan forwarding emails without reading them. Missing strategy meetings, collecting a senior executive salary while other managers quietly covered his work. Paula had looked at me carefully. We have enough to terminate all of them. I closed the folder. Not before the wedding. I'll deal with it afterward. She didn't argue. She simply asked one question. What if they don't wait until afterward? At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Standing inside that ballroom, I realized she hadn't been cautious enough. Marlene folded her arms. So, have you made your decision? I looked at her, then at Ethan, then slowly toward the microphone waiting on the stage. And for the first time all afternoon, I stopped thinking like a bride. I started thinking like the CEO who had spent 10 years protecting everything she'd built. The bouquet slipped from my fingers, landing softly on the polished wooden floor. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the sound. Then, I took my first step toward the stage. The room didn't follow me. Not at first. People simply watched. They assumed I was going to calm everyone down. Save the wedding. That's what I'd always done. Fix the mess. Protect the Carters. Protect Ethan. Protect the image. No one realized. I had finally run out of reasons to protect people who had never protected me. My heels echoed across the ballroom. One step, then another. Every sound suddenly felt louder. The violinists stopped playing. The photographers lowered their cameras. Even the catering staff froze beside their serving carts. By the time I reached the stage, the room had become so quiet I could hear the microphone humming. Behind me, Ethan's voice finally cracked. Clear. Not loud. Just enough for me to stop. I didn't. Claire, please. There was fear in his voice now. Not fear of losing me. Fear of what I might say. Marlene walked faster. She reached the stage before Ethan did, still smiling, always smiling. She leaned toward me as though she were about to fix my veil. Don't embarrass yourself. I met her eyes. I'm not the one who's embarrassed. Her smile stiffened. You'll regret this. I've regretted staying silent far longer. She lowered her voice. If you humiliate this family, you'll humiliate yourself. I almost admired her. Even now, she wasn't trying to win the argument. She was trying to redefine the battlefield. If I spoke, I became emotional. If I stayed quiet, she won. It was elegant, calculated, and exactly why she'd waited until every guest was seated. Ethan finally reached us. He stood between me and the microphone. Please, just give me 5 minutes. For what? So we can fix this. I looked at him. You had weeks. You told me that yourself. His shoulders dropped. I made a mistake. No, I answered. You made a decision. They're different. He rubbed both hands across his face. I didn't think she'd actually do it. Marlene turned sharply. Ethan! He ignored her. I thought she'd cool down. You gambled. I know. You gambled with my company because you were afraid to disappoint your mother. He looked away. That tiny movement hurt more than any apology could have. Because it was the first honest thing he'd done all afternoon. A flashbulb exploded somewhere in the audience. Then another. Guests had started recording openly now. Nobody was pretending anymore. This wasn't a wedding. It had become a courtroom. And every person inside had quietly chosen a side. Marlene stepped in front of Ethan. If we're finished with the drama, let's continue the ceremony. She turned toward the guests with effortless grace. I'm terribly sorry. Families sometimes have emotional discussions. A few nervous laughs followed. She had found another angle. If she could restart the wedding, she could make everything else seem like a temporary disagreement. She extended one hand toward me. Come, let's finish this. I looked at her hand, then slowly asked, if I sign today, will you promise never to ask for anything else? Her answer came too quickly. Of course. I smiled faintly. There it is. What? The first lie you've told in public. Her expression finally broke, only for a second. Enough. I knew I was close. Howard stepped beside his wife. His tone remained calm. Claire, no one is taking your company. You'll still run it. I nodded. So why do you need majority ownership? Silence. Howard cleared his throat. It's symbolic. I tilted my head. 51% is never symbolic. It's control. The guests began whispering again. This time, not quietly. Brittany suddenly spoke up from the front table. This is unbelievable. She pointed directly at me. You're choosing money over marriage. I looked at her. No. I'm choosing not to confuse love with surrender. She scoffed. If you trusted Ethan, I trusted him enough to marry him. I paused. I never agreed to become his employee. Several guests exchanged glances. Someone in the back quietly applauded. Only once, then stopped. Marlene heard it. She knew something had shifted, so she abandoned kindness. The mask came off. You think you're special because you own a company? Her voice became colder. My son gave you his name. I looked at Ethan. He hasn't. The words hung in the air, heavy, precise. I don't have his name. I still have mine. For the first time, Marlene lost control. Fine, she folded her arms. If that's how you feel. There will be no wedding. She expected me to panic, to cry, to bargain. Instead, I picked up the microphone. The feedback squealed through the ballroom. Every conversation stopped instantly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Thank you all for coming today. 200 faces looked back at me, some confused, some uncomfortable, some already guessing what was about to happen. I owe every one of you an apology. Marlene took one quick step toward me. Claire, I raised one finger, without looking at her. She stopped. That was the first time all afternoon someone had interrupted her. The balance of power shifted. The entire room felt it. I looked back at the guests. I believed today was a celebration of trust. I glanced toward Ethan. I was wrong. A long silence followed. Then I said the sentence no one in the Carter family thought I'd ever have the courage to say. This wedding is canceled. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping across the floor, photographers rushing forward. Marlene's face turned white. Brittany stood so fast her champagne glass shattered on the floor. Howard closed his eyes. Only Ethan didn't move. He simply stared at me, like he still believed I would change my mind. Then, over the noise, a voice came from the ballroom entrance. Miss Bennett! Everyone turned. It was Paula, still wearing her navy business suit, still carrying the same thick blue folder she'd shown me 6 months earlier. She met my eyes, then said the one sentence that made Ethan's expression change from fear to genuine panic. Your legal team is here. The words hit Ethan before anyone else. Your legal team is here. He turned so quickly he nearly knocked over a chair. Paula wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 attorneys from Bennett Supply Group. Their lead counsel, Michael Reeves, carried a leather portfolio. The other 2 held sealed document boxes. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't panicked. They looked exactly the way professionals look when they've prepared for something long before everyone else realizes it's happening. The ballroom buzzed with whispers. Legal team? What is this? Is someone suing somebody? I handed the microphone back to its stand, then walked toward Paula. Mylene stepped into my path. No. Her smile had vanished. Whatever this is, it can wait until Monday. I stopped inches from her. Why Monday? Because today is about family. I held her gaze. No. Today became business. The moment you asked for 51%. Ethan hurried over. Claire, please. Don't do this. His voice shook. Not from anger, from fear. He kept glancing at the attorneys. At Paula. At Michael. At the document boxes. He already knew. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't about the wedding anymore. Paula handed me the familiar blue folder, the same one she'd placed on my desk 6 months earlier. I updated it. I opened it. New tabs. New reports. New signatures. The investigation hadn't stopped after our first conversation. It had grown. Ethan looked at Paula. What is this? She answered calmly. The consequences of ignoring 6 months of warnings. He laughed nervously. Warnings? I work there too. Paula nodded. You did. The room fell silent. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? I closed the folder. It means you haven't worked for Bennett Supply Group for the last 6 months. His face tightened. What are you talking about? You've been collecting a salary. You've had an office, a title, but your responsibilities were reassigned. His confusion turned into disbelief. No, they weren't. They were. I looked at Paula. Who handled Ethan's accounts? Daniel Foster. Who negotiated Midwest Logistics? Sarah Kim. The Chicago expansion? Marcus Hill. The supplier dispute? I handled it, Paula answered. One by one, every major responsibility Ethan believed he'd been managing had quietly been carried by someone else. He stared at me. You knew? I hoped you'd notice. What? That everyone else was doing your job. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marlene stepped forward immediately. This is ridiculous. You humiliated my son. No, I replied. He humiliated himself. She pointed toward Paula. You planned this. Paula shook her head. No, we documented it. There's a difference. Michael Reeves finally spoke. His voice was calm. Mrs. Carter, everything inside these files has been reviewed by outside counsel. Attendance, performance, financial approvals, vendor communications, expense reports. He paused. Every document has been independently verified. Howard quietly asked, why wasn't the family told? Michael looked at him. Because Ms. Bennett instructed us not to interfere with the wedding. Howard slowly closed his eyes. He understood immediately. Claire had spent months protecting Ethan. Even now, she hadn't exposed him until she was forced to. Ethan took 2 hurried steps toward me. You were going to fire me? No. I was going to give you one final chance. When? After the honeymoon. He laughed bitterly. So all this time, you were testing me? I shook my head. No. I was hoping you'd become the man I thought I was marrying. Silence. A painful one, because everyone knew which answer hurt more. Brittany suddenly stood. This company wouldn't even exist without Ethan. Several Carter relatives nodded. She grew more confident. He introduced investors. He opened doors. He helped build everything. I looked at Michael. He already knew what I was asking. He removed a single sheet from the portfolio. Investment history. He handed copies to several board members seated near the front. No outside investment entered Bennett Supply Group before year 7. He turned another page. The company reached profitability 2 years before Mr. Carter and Ms. Bennett met. Another page. Mr. Carter has never personally invested capital into the business. The whispers returned, louder this time. Not aimed at me. Brittany looked stunned. That's impossible. No, Paula answered. It's documented. Marlene made one final attempt. She stepped toward the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're forgetting something. She smiled again, smaller now, more desperate. This is still a wedding. She looked directly at me. Claire, people make mistakes. My son loves you. Don't throw away 3 beautiful years because of one difficult afternoon. For one brief second, I almost believed her. 3 years. Birthdays, late-night takeout, road trips, hospital visits, plans, dreams, a home we'd already designed on paper. I closed my eyes. It would have been so easy to pretend none of this had happened, to tell everyone we'd discuss it later, to save face, to save the wedding, to save Ethan. Then I remembered something Paula had asked me 6 months earlier. What if they don't wait until afterward? She had been right. They hadn't waited. And if I ignored today, there would always be another demand, another sacrifice, another excuse. I opened my eyes. The doubt was gone. I looked at Ethan one last time. 3 years is a long time. He nodded quickly. Yes, it is. Then don't let them end like this. I smiled sadly. They didn't end today. They ended the day you watched your mother bargain for my life's work and decided silence was easier than standing beside me. His shoulders collapsed. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. Then Michael Reeves quietly stepped beside me. Ms. Bennett? I looked at him. The termination letters are ready. Across the ballroom, Brittany's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered. Because everyone in the Carter family suddenly realized those letters weren't written for Ethan alone. Brittany's champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom. No one flinched. No one looked down. Every eye was fixed on the stack of white envelopes in Michael Reeves' hands. Suddenly, the wedding no longer mattered. Everyone wanted to know whose life was about to change. Marlene recovered first. She always did. Her smile returned. Smaller, sharper. You wouldn't. She looked directly at me. You'd fire your husband's family. On your wedding day? I held her gaze. My husband's family? I glanced toward Ethan. We're not getting married. So they're simply employees. The words landed like ice water. No anger, no yelling, just a fact. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, someone quietly whispered, "My God." Howard took one careful step forward. His voice remained calm. Claire, you've made your point. No, I answered. I've only told the truth. He sighed. We can still fix this. I shook my head. You keep saying we. There hasn't been a we for a very long time. Ethan looked from me to the envelopes, then back again. Claire, His voice cracked. Please don't punish everyone because of me. That sentence almost worked. Almost. Because it appealed to the version of me that always carried everyone else's guilt. The version that apologized when someone else crossed the line. The version that kept peace by sacrificing herself. That woman had walked into this ballroom. She wasn't the one standing here anymore. I looked at Paula. When did you recommend termination? 6 months ago. And what did I say? You said, Paula smiled sadly, not before the wedding. Several guests exchanged confused glances. They hadn't expected that. I turned back toward Ethan. Do you understand? He frowned. What? I protected you. Silence. I protected your sister. Your cousin. Your parents. I gave every one of you 6 months to become people I could still trust. My voice remained steady. You didn't fail today. You failed every day after that. Brittany suddenly stepped forward. This is insane. I made a few expense mistakes. A few? Paula calmly opened another folder. Would you like the exact number? Brittany froze. Paula continued. 43. The room fell silent. 43 personal expenses billed to company accounts. 8 unauthorized vendor reimbursements. 3 altered mileage reports. Brittany's face turned bright red. Everyone does that. No, Paula replied. They don't. Peter stood up next. So we're just disposable now? No, I answered. You're accountable. There's a difference. Marlene realized the room was slipping away from her. She abandoned logic. She chose emotion, exactly as I knew she would. She stepped toward the guests instead of toward me, her eyes filled with tears. I raised Ethan to believe family comes first. She looked around the ballroom. Is that really a crime? A few older relatives nodded. She saw it. She pressed harder. I only wanted my son protected. If Claire truly loved him, Marlene. She turned toward me. If Ethan had built Bennett Supply Group, would you ask him to give me 51% today? She answered instantly. That's different. No, I replied. It isn't. You just answered the only question that matters. The room went completely still, because everyone understood what she'd accidentally admitted. This had never been about marriage. It had always been about ownership. Howard slowly removed his wedding ring. He rolled it between his fingers. Not because he intended to take it off, because he suddenly understood something. After 40 years of marriage, he had never once asked Marlene to surrender what she'd built before meeting him. He looked at his wife, then quietly lowered his eyes. That silence hurt Marlene more than any argument. For the first time, her own husband wasn't standing beside her. Ethan noticed it too. Dad. Howard didn't answer. Dad. Finally, Howard looked up. I'm disappointed. Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. I know. You should be. Howard slowly shook his head. No. I'm disappointed. Because somewhere along the way, you started believing love entitled you to ownership. Another silence. I don't know where you learned that. Marlene closed her eyes. She knew exactly where. Tears finally rolled down Ethan's face. I never wanted the company. I believed him. That wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was that wanting it had never been the point. He'd watched the people around him reach for it and chosen not to stop them. Sometimes, cowardice causes the same damage as greed. Michael stepped beside me again. Ms. Bennett. I nodded. He handed me the envelopes. One by one, I walked across the ballroom. First, Brittany. Then Peter. Then Dana. Then the others employed by Bennett Supply Group. No speeches. No humiliation. Just one sentence. Your employment ends today. Some shouted. Some cried. Some begged. I answered none of them. Because this wasn't revenge. These decisions had been made months ago. Today, they were simply delivered. Only one envelope remained. Ethan looked at it, then at me. You really did it. No, I answered quietly. You did. I held out the final envelope. He didn't take it. I don't care about the job. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I care about us. For the first time all afternoon, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. Not the executive, not the son, just Ethan. Broken, terrified. Too late. He reached toward me, not for the envelope, but for my hand. Before his fingers could touch mine, another voice echoed through the ballroom. Claire! It was my father. He had remained silent all afternoon. Now, he walked slowly toward the stage, carrying a thin brown document tube. He stopped beside me, looked at Ethan, then handed the tube to me. I was going to give you this after the ceremony. I frowned. What is it? He smiled. A wedding gift. I untied the ribbon, unrolled the documents. And the moment I read the first page, I understood why my father had waited until today. Because this wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It was something Ethan's family had spent the entire afternoon trying to take from me. Without realizing, my father had already found a way to make sure they never could. The ballroom became so quiet, I could hear the paper trembling in my hands. The document wasn't a stock certificate. It wasn't a check. It was an amended ownership agreement for Bennett Supply Group. Signed. Notarized. Filed months earlier. My father smiled gently. I asked your attorneys to prepare it after our conversation last winter. I looked up. The conversation. When you asked what would happen if I ever married. He nodded. You told me you weren't afraid of sharing your life. His eyes drifted toward Ethan. You were only afraid someone would mistake your kindness for permission. Michael Reeves stepped forward. He addressed the room, not just me. 6 months ago, Ms. Bennett transferred all voting rights into an irrevocable governance trust. A wave of confusion swept across the guests. He continued calmly. Claire remains the sole beneficial owner. She cannot be forced to surrender control through marriage, family pressure, or post-marital claims. He paused. Any attempt to obtain majority control without her written consent is legally impossible. The room fell silent again. Marlene stared at the papers. No. Michael nodded once. I'm afraid so. The 51% you requested hasn't been available to anyone for months. Marlene's face hardened. You knew. I looked at her. No. I hoped I'd never need it. That was the truth. I hadn't prepared the documents because I expected a fight. I'd prepared them because my father taught me something years ago. Trust people. Just don't build a future that depends on never being disappointed. Ethan slowly looked at me. You never told me. I almost did. When? The night you asked whether we'd merge our finances after the honeymoon. He remembered. I could see it. I thought, if we were really building a partnership, you'd ask how to protect each other. Instead, he'd asked how to combine ownership. Back then, I'd convinced myself I was overthinking. Now, I realized my instincts had been trying to protect me long before my heart was ready to listen. Marlene took one last step forward. So that's it? You destroy this family and walk away? I smiled sadly. No. You destroyed your own family the moment you taught your son that love was something to negotiate. For the first time all afternoon, Marlene had no reply. Howard quietly approached me. His shoulders seemed smaller than they had that morning. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me one. I do. He glanced toward Ethan. I kept telling myself silence kept the peace. He shook his head. It doesn't. It only protects the loudest person in the room. He extended his hand. I hope one day you remember there was at least one Carter who wished this day had ended differently. I shook his hand. I already know. Ethan finally accepted the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what was inside. He looked at me with red, exhausted eyes. If I had stopped her, would we still be getting married? The question hurt, because somewhere inside it was the man I'd once fallen in love with. I answered honestly. I don't know. His expression fell. I continued, but I know this. If you'd stood beside me today, we would have had a chance. He closed his eyes, just once, because he finally understood. He hadn't lost me when I canceled the wedding. He'd lost me the moment he decided keeping peace with his mother mattered more than standing beside the woman he asked to marry him. I slipped my engagement ring from my finger, walked the last few steps between us, placed it gently in his hand. I don't hate you. I probably never will. But love can't survive where courage never shows up. His fingers slowly closed around the ring. He didn't try to give it back. He knew. Some endings don't happen because people stop loving each other. They happen because one person keeps asking the other to carry a weight that was never theirs alone. One by one, the guests began leaving. Not in awkward silence, in thoughtful silence. Many stopped to hug me. Some shook my father's hand. Others quietly thanked Paula. No one congratulated the Carter family. The ballroom slowly emptied. The flowers remained. The orchestra packed away their instruments. The wedding cake stood untouched beneath soft white lights. A celebration that would never happen. 3 months later, the ballroom had become nothing more than a memory. Bennett Supply Group had opened its largest distribution center in company history. Not because I worked harder, because I finally stopped carrying people who refused to carry their own responsibilities. Brittany, Peter, Dana. Every termination was upheld. The company stabilized. Employee satisfaction reached its highest level since the business began. Paula was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. When I handed her the new nameplate, she laughed. I told you 6 months ago. You did. You just weren't ready. I smiled. No, I wasn't. Almost a year later, I received a handwritten envelope. No return address. Inside was a single note. Claire, I spent months trying to decide whether to write this, not to ask for another chance. I lost that the day I stayed silent. I only wanted to tell you something I should have said when it still mattered. You were never difficult. You were never intimidating. You were simply stronger than I was willing to become. I'm finally learning the difference. I hope your life is everything mine wasn't brave enough to protect. Ethan. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, then set it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. Not because I wanted to remember him, because pretending the past never happened isn't healing. Learning from it is. That evening, I locked the office just before sunset. The warehouse lights glowed behind me. Forklifts moved steadily across the loading docks. Drivers laughed as they finished another shift. This company had survived recessions, fires, supply chain collapses, and one wedding that almost cost me far more than a marriage. My father walked beside me toward the parking lot. Any regrets? I looked back one last time. At the building I'd fought to protect. Then ahead, toward the life I no longer had to defend from the people who claimed to love me. I smiled. Only one. He waited. I wish I'd believed sooner that the right person would never ask me to prove my love by giving away my self-respect. He nodded. Neither of us looked back again. Because losing a wedding wasn't the greatest loss of that day. Losing the illusion that love could survive without respect was. And strangely enough, that loss became the reason I finally found peace.